Hello, namaste everyone. So this is the 9th class of our ongoing foundation basic course on Vedic astrology. And in the 8th class, we dealt with death and how to, how to calculate it. So today in the ninth class, we will be looking at, the various other adverse factors that can, that can cause a hitting on the health of the native and can also, can also bring about death. All right. And before we start, as usual, we'll start the class with our Shanti mantra from the Upanishads. Okay. Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Bhunakatu, Sahaviryankar Vavahai, Tejasvinadadhitamastu Mavida Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. Yeah, good evening, Twinkle-ji. All right. Okay, so as I said in the last class, we looked at death and and how to calculate it. But then there are other other miscellaneous adverse factors. This is the 9th class. Okay, this is the 9th class that we're having. Okay. As I said, we have already seen how to calculate death in the last class, but then there are other factors that need our attention. Okay, and these are these are some adverse factors which must be known so as to so as to obtain the warning signals and taking appropriate remedial measures. Okay, and the as I mentioned these things, it is not meant to frighten any student. Okay, and it is not wise for any practicing astrologer to go and frighten the client. All right, but the intention should always be to help the client with utmost with utmost sincerity by advising appropriate corrective measures, and those corrective measures could there is a problem, just a minute. Yeah, just kidding. Yeah, and those corrective measures can actually be taken in the form of health remedies as well. Okay, those corrective measures can also be can also be prescribed in the name of health remedies. Okay, as health remedies, so as to say. All right. So the first adverse position that people must know about is the 22nd trikana. Okay, so trikana is the D3 divisional chart. Okay, is the D3 divisional chart, which is known as the trikana. It shows your it shows a great deal about your siblings. Okay, because that is the that is the microscopic examination of the third house. So we have 16 divisional charts in Vedic astrology. All right, and they are known as vargas. Okay, and the 16 divisional charts together are known as the shodasha vargas. Okay, so this 22nd trikana is the trikana that falls exactly 7 houses away from the lagna. Okay, so what happens is it there is a way to calculate it manually, but I'm not going for the manual calculation because the software will obviously show you what it is. Okay, so it will fall in the 8th house on the same degrees as those of the lagna. Okay, and how to how to calculate it manually? You will place the degrees of the lagna in the sign occupying the 8th house of the birth chart and then determine its trikana. Okay, so the lord of that sign, okay, the lord of that sign and the planets falling in that sign in the trikana chart are evil, and they are and they are capable of causing misfortune, they are capable of causing disease, they are capable of causing death. Okay, so for as beginners, just find out the D3 chart. Any software will calculate all the divisional charge. Just find out the D3 chart, and the 22nd trikana is the 8th house of the of the D3 chart. Okay, And the lord of this house, as well as any planet falling in the in the eighth house of the D3 chart, will always will always give adverse effects, especially in terms of health. Okay, so you can check your own charts to see if you had any if you had any difficult conditions in terms of health or otherwise, when when you were going through the periods or the sub periods of that planet ruling the eighth house, or or any planet falling in the eighth house of the D3 chart. All right, then we come to the 64th Navamsha. Okay, so the 64th Navamsha is calculated from the moon. Okay, the 22nd Rekana is calculated from Lagna, but this 64th Navamsha is calculated from the moon. Okay, and to it is it falls exactly 7 houses away from the moon. And what you'll do is that you will place the degrees of the moon in the sign 8 from it and determine the Navamsha of that sign. So this is how you do it manually. Okay, and the lord of the Navamsha is the lord of the 64th Navamsha, and along with planets falling in that house, it will always behave as a malefic. Okay, and in the usual Navamsha chart, again, if you're using the software does this for you. Okay, so the sign of the fourth house from the moon Navamsha, from the Chandra Amsha, that is, it happens to be the 64th Navamsha. Okay, take the Navamsha chart and find the lord of the fourth house from the position of the moon in the Navamsha, that is Chandra Amsha. So that is that is the 64th Navamsha. Okay, and because it concerns the moon, so you know the precautionary or the remedial measures are usually given in terms of food that you need to avoid. Okay, so for example, suppose if the moon is in say Dhanu Amsha, that means if the moon is in Sagittarius in Navamsha, so count 4 houses from Sagittarius, so it comes to Pisces. So Jupiter will be very malefic for the for the native. Okay, and how to how to use this in the real world, how to use this in the practical world, is that you will always avoid the food that is connected to the lord of the planet, which is the fourth from the moon in the Navamsha. Okay, and this is something that you should do, you should always consciously do. All right, and this is something that you should advise others to do as well, if they are if they are taking a consultation from you. Okay, so I have a list of the foods that I have that are there that need to be avoided. Just hold on here.
What was the food for Mercury?
The food is no, I'm not saying I'm saying that because it concerns the moon, the 64 Navamsha concerns the moon, so you have to you have to avoid food because the moon is all about food. Okay, okay, so for the sun, these are the foods that you need to avoid, the pungent foods. Okay, so for example, it could be onion, pepper, ginger, etc. For moon, it has to be saline. Okay, so this is a real tricky stuff, isn't it? If you know if the moon is in Aries Navamsha, the 4 houses away from the moon will be Cancer, so you need to be really careful with salt. Okay, now giving up salt is very difficult. You can easily give up sugar. For most people, you can easily give up sugar. Giving up salt is very difficult, right? So this will be the case only for only for the moon in Aries Navamsha. Otherwise it's fine. But then if if the moon is, yeah, and then for Mars, it is bitter food that you need to avoid. So bitter gourd, neem leaves, and other things. Karela, someone would say, right? For Mercury, it is mixed foods. Okay, foods having mixed taste. There are few people who are very fond of having mixed food. Food consisting of all the tastes. Then for Jupiter, you have to avoid sweet food. It includes ghee, it includes dates. Okay, it includes sugar. For Venus, you have to avoid sour food, which is like lemon, tamarind, etc. And for Saturn, the food is astringent food. So I could come across only one example, plantain. There would be other examples as well. Okay. So these are the foods that you need to avoid concerning the Lord of the house, 4 houses away from the Chandra Amsha, that is Navamsha, the position of moon in the Navamsha. Okay.
So if the fourth house from the moon is Gemini, it would be Mercury, right?
Yeah, it would be Mercury. It would be Mercury. Twinkle it does not mean everything. It means, it means a combination of, it means food that is having a combination of sweet as well as sour, as well as salty and everything. Okay. For example, in India, a very popular food is the ice gola that, that young boys and girls and even old people have. They mix all the ingredients together, you know, so that is, then you have this pale moody coming up, right? So they mix sweet, they make salt, everything. So that is mixed food. All right. Yeah. So these are the adverse factors that you must consider. Okay. And as I said, adverse factors do not necessarily mean death, but what happens is, it can actually cause the health to go down drastically. Okay. And that can be, that can be the starting point of something. All right. Okay. Now we come to the significations of houses and planets, and this is very, very important to understand what the planet is asking you to do. Okay, so the 12 houses of the zodiac will represent all the aspects of existence at terrestrial as well as individual levels. Okay, and like the 12 houses, the 9 planets will also indicate the various areas of existence. Okay, so consider the 12 houses of the zodiac as fields of crops having different qualities. One may be a field of rice crop, the other may be a field of wheat. Okay, and the planets are the vehicles that you're using to drive through this crop. That is how you can look at it. All right. So what happens is, in order to analyze a horoscopic chart, it is very important to understand what these different houses as well as these different planets mean. Okay, and as I have been saying repeatedly, you have to understand which planet and which house are interacting with each other and what is the result of that interaction for the for the specific for the specific native, for the specific jataka. And then to understand planets and their interactions with the with the houses, you have to know at least 2 dasha systems. Okay, so Vimshottari Dasha is something that everyone follows, but apart from this, you also have to know another Dasha system. There are various Dasha systems that you can just pick up, and we will have a class on, we will have a we'll have a class on Chara Dasha. Okay, so that is a Dasha system that everyone must know. It is a Dasha system that was made very popular by Sri K. and Rauji. Okay, and yes, D3 is Drakana. Okay, so we'll have a class on Chara Dasha and how to use it. Okay, but that class will happen on Saturday, and you are very much, on one of the Saturdays we'll have it, but you are very much encouraged to, to attend it live so that you can have an understanding with various examples. Okay, all right. So there is a disclaimer that I'll be giving it out. So whatever information I'll try to provide about the houses and about the planets, it is not, it is not exhaustive. Okay, because at the end of the day, several new meanings will emerge when these principles are applied in the modern context. Okay, because as you know, astrology is a very, it's a very alive and expanding subject, right? So for example, when we speak about cryptocurrency is purely a Saturnine phenomenon, right? But there was no cryptocurrency during the time when the saints were devising these, these predictive principles. But then cryptocurrency is purely Saturn. That is something that everyone agrees. Okay. Similarly, the internet is Rahu in action. All right. So these concepts will, new concepts will be added. New concepts will be kept getting, as more and more new things come up, new concepts will also keep getting added up. All right. So this is the, this is the nature of astrology, being very vast and incomprehensible, so as to say. Okay. So we first look at the houses. All right. So the houses from the Lagna to the 7th house, they, they represent the right half of the body of the native. And for the spouse, it is the left half. Okay. You may be a male or a female. So from the 1st house to the 7th house, it represents the right half of your body. And the 1st house to the 7th house represents the left half of the body for your spouse. Okay. And then it is the reverse for the 7th to the 12th house. So from the 7th house to the lagna, that means for you the seventh, the houses, the houses starting from the 7th house to the lagna will represent your left half, and for your spouse it will represent his or her right half. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll also give you the terms that are associated with medical astrology, so that your prediction skills can be harnessed or can be improved by this. All right. So the first house, okay, this is the lagna, right? Lagna, the most important defining word about the lagna is your power to discern. Okay, the power of intelligence. Okay, the power to discriminate, right? So it also represents fame. It also represents character. It also represents strength. It represents courage. Okay, it represents knowledge or the lack of knowledge, right? Depending on the planets which are sitting in it. For example, if you have Mercury, sitting in the lagna, you'd be very, very knowledgeable. If you have Sun sitting in a lagna, you'd be very, very knowledgeable. But suppose you have Saturn sitting in a lagna, then there would be a lack of knowledge. There would be a lack of understanding. Okay. Then it also represents residence, the place of birth. It represents dignity, honor, ancestry, livelihood. Then it will also represent, the beginning of anything. Okay. The present moment. It will represent wisdom. It will represent wealth, comforts, discomforts as well, lack of comforts as well. It will represent self-respect. Okay. That is the reason, people say that whenever a malefic planet is transiting your lagna, you should be very, very careful about your, about the about your about the people around you, because you can get affected by scandals that can really, really harm your respect. Okay. Then it represents peace of mind. Okay. It also represents any kind of virtue or any kind of vices that you have, because all virtues and vices will follow, from your ability to discern between the right and the wrong. All right. And in medical astrology, it represents the body in Neral. Okay. Then it represents, complexion. Okay. It represents marks or moles on the body. It represents, whether you have a good health or unsound health. It represents skin texture. It represents the texture of your skin. It represents longevity. Okay. It represents sleep. It represents head. It represents brain. It represents texture of hair, and it also represents stamina. Okay. So that is the reason, another reason why, why if you have say fiery planets in the lagna like Sun or Mars, or fiery planets are impacting the lagna, then you can lose your hair very, very quickly. Okay. So the second house, it represents wealth, the saved wealth, that is. Okay, not your created wealth, the saved wealth. It represents speech, right? So if you have soft planets in the second house, your speech will be very, very soft. If you have, rough, if you have malefic planets in the second house, your speech will be very, very harsh. People will be repelled. Okay, people might be repelled by your speech, right? Say if you have, for example, now you have to be really careful while judging the effects of planets in the second house. For example, Rahu is a malefic if it is placed in the second house. Rahu is anyways a malefic by nature, but in the second house it gives a very flamboyant speech. All the motivational speakers who inspire you to take action, or that coach who is inspiring you to take action, such people are impacted by Rahu in the second house. Okay, because they can make people do things on their behalf on the basis of what they say. Okay, so it's a very flamboyant speech. Similarly, if Moon is there in the second house, the speech would be very, very seductive, right? Because the Moon has the power to seduce. Okay, the Moon has the power to seduce. He has 27 wives. So that is how you look at planets in the second house impacting your speech. All right. Then it represents all the precious stones that you may have. All right, like pearls or diamonds, or buying and selling precious stones, jewelry. Then it also represents your ability to accumulate wealth. Okay. It represents the acquisitions from your father's side. All right. It also represents food, the taste. Okay. It represents clothes, the eloquence that you may have. It represents humility. It also represents, education, because the first education that you have is within the family. right? Your family has a big say in how in how you conduct yourself in public, right? It also represents it also represents your it also represents matters of self control. Okay, it also represents death. Why death? Because it is the 12th from the third house. So we'll discuss Bhavad Bhavam in details, where where we examine the relationship between each and every house in Vedic astrology. Okay, that is known as Bhavad Bhavam, but we'll come to that in details. All right. So in medical astrology, it represents face, it represents teeth, tongue, oral cavity, it represents nose, right? It represents your nails, it represents speech again, and it represents the right eye. Okay, so if you have a malefic in the second house, just like the second house represents the right eye, the 12th house will represent the left eye. So if you have a malefic in these second house, in the second house or in the 12th house, you might suffer from eyesight issues. Okay, so I have two malefics. I have Saturn in the 12th house and Rahu in the second house. So I had to wear glasses from a very young age. Okay, so that is how it works. Then you have the third house, which represents your courage and valor. Third house is also about physical fitness, the talent that you have, the hobbies that you have. Okay, it represents your how selfish or how selfless you are. Okay, it represents sports, right? Someone wants to excel in sports, just look at the condition of the third lord. Okay, it represents fights, right? The street fights that you have. It represents trading. Okay, it represents the stability of the mind. All right, it represents neighborhood, it represents inheritance as well. It represents short journeys. It also represents the people who protect you, like the police or the army and so on, right? uh so in medical astrology, it represents years. Okay, that is the right year in particular. Then it represents neck, it represents throat, shoulders, bones, upper limbs, mental instability. It also represents the physical growth of your body, how healthy is the growth of your physical body. That is all right. Then we come to the fourth house. Fourth house represents, of course, it primarily represents your happiness. Okay, it represents your vehicles, it represents your mother, it represents the near and dear ones, the people who are very close to you. It represents lands and houses. It represents agriculture, farming, gardens, orchards, for example. Okay, it represents it represents your properties. Okay, it also represents the quality of the fourth house, or the fourth lord will represent what properties do you have. All right. And then it also represents your elementary education, the education that you have in school. Okay, it represents comforts as well. Okay, it represents conveyances in the form of vehicles. It represents courage also, right? It represents agricultural products. It also represents the possession of agricultural animals, like cattle or horses. Okay. And in medical astrology, it is representative of chest, heart, lungs, breast, and potent medicine. Okay, the medicine that is actually working for you. All right. Then the fifth house, it represents progeny. Okay, it represents children. It also represents your purva punya. Okay, whatever deeds you have committed in the past life, good or bad, the results of those deeds are given by the fifth house. All right, purva punya. Okay, it represents the mental ability. Okay, it represents the learning ability of the native. All right, it also represents the scholarship, how much scholarship the native is capable of getting in the in the at the time of his or her education. It also represents prosperity. Okay, it represents acquisitions through wife. Acquisitions through wife means you get children only when the wife comes to you, isn't it? So that is what is meant by acquisition from wife. Okay, it represents your it also represents investments. Okay, it also represents devotion. Okay, it is also known as mantra bhava. All right. So the fifth lord is known as Mantresha. Okay, so it is the ruler of your mantras. So if if you have a weak fifth lord, then you'll not be able to do mantras. Okay, just see if your fifth lord is strongly placed or weakly placed. You'll understand what I'm saying, trying to say. Okay, if you have a weak fifth lord, you'll not be able to. You'll be, maybe you'll start a mantra, but you'll not be able to follow it up. All right. It also represents authorship. Okay. It also represents the karmas of past lives. As I said, purva punya. Okay, good or bad, you get results from the fifth house. So in medical astrology, it represents heart, it represents the upper abdomen, it represents liver, gallbladder. Okay, it represents the subconscious mind. Okay, it also represents problems related to pregnancy. Okay, so if there are if there are malefics in the fifth house, it can actually cause delay in childbirth. But you not only look at the fifth house, you also look at the ninth house for issues in pregnancy. Okay, and for denial of a child, there will be malefics placed both in the fifth house as well as in the ninth house. All right, fifth house also represents adopted children. Okay, then comes the sixth house. So this is known as a dusthana. It represents enemies, opposition. Okay, it represents mental agitation, injuries, accidents, diseases, the wounds that you sustain in your day-to-day life. Okay, loans, debts, losses, disappointments, obstacles, humiliation, your indulgence in prohibited acts like prostitution. Okay, it also represents quarrels, threats, then imprisonment. It represents your stepmother as well. All right, it represents you know servants. Okay, it represents subordinates, the people who work under you. It also represents all the obstacles that you come across on a daily basis. All right, and the sixth lord will create obstacles wherever it goes. Okay, wherever the sixth lord goes, it will create some kind of obstacle or the other. So in medical astrology, it represents intestines. Okay, it represents the umbilical region. Okay, it represents phlegmatic illnesses. That means illnesses due to kapha. Okay, illnesses due to water. Okay, it represents tuberculosis, eye diseases, poisoning. It also represents accidents and operations. Okay, then we have the seventh house, which is of course the house of spouse or the partner. Okay, and by partner I mean the partner who is indulging with you sexually. Okay, it is also the house of marriage, it is also the house of adultery, it is also the house of lust or passion, and it also gives an indication of the nature and character of the spouse. Okay, it also represents business partnerships. Okay, it also represents it also represents kama. Okay, kama means the desires that you have, and they may be wild desires. Okay, there is no limit to human desires. Okay, it also represents death, because it is the 12th from the 8th house, right? So in medical astrology, it represents the lower urinary tract. Okay, it represents the anal canal, the semen. Okay, it also represents the seminal vesicles, then the urethra, and then it also represents the prostate gland. It also represents your sexual organs. Okay, then we have the 8th house. So the 8th house, it represents the marital status of a woman. Okay, it is known as the mangalya bhava. People confuse mangalya bhava to be the 7th house. It is not the 7th house, it is the 8th house. Okay, and then it represents longevity. It also represents disgrace, defeat, suddenness, unexpectedness, misery, then killing a living being, capital punishment. Okay, it also represents deaths to your father. All right, it represents frightful places. It represents crevices. It represents holes. Okay, it represents your wife's family as well. Okay, it represents the family of the spouse as well. It represents sudden and unexpected gains. It represents hidden talents. It also represents inheritance and your spiritual awakening. Okay, and in medical astrology, it is representative of external genitalia. Then it also represents incurable or chronic diseases. Then loss or amputation of of any body part. longevity. It also represents, mental anguish. Okay, so there's a video that that I have on YouTube regarding the mystical eighth house. You can just go and watch that video. I've given several examples to show how the eighth house can can cause a lot of ups and downs in the fortunes of a person. All right. And then we have the ninth house, which is which is the Bhagyasthan. Okay, the ninth lord is very, very important, right? The ninth lord should not be debilitated in the Navamsha. Okay, because you can get over the debilitation of any planet in the Navamsha, but the ninth lord of the Rashi chart should not go and get debilitated in the Navamsha. Otherwise, your your Bhagya is meant to suffer. Okay, your Bhagya is meant to suffer. So the ninth lord, it represents your fortune. Okay, it represents your father, your gurus, the virtuous deeds that you do. Okay, it represents religious, religious institutions. It represents universities as well. All right, it represents, it represents the acts of kindness that you do, the acts of charity that you do. It represents your knowledge. Okay, it represents your your devotion as well. Okay, devotion is also related to the fourth house, but ninth house represents devotion towards the towards the supreme being. Okay, it also represents your diksha. Okay, because it represents the guru, it also represents the diksha. All right, the the mantra that the guru gives you, right? It also represents fame and fortune, as I said. It represents the progeny in case of females. Okay, it represents rituals and all the pujas that you do. It represents long journeys, just like the third house represents short journeys. The ninth house represents long journeys. It also represents travel by the sea. Okay, in medical astrology, it represents hips, thighs, nourishment. Okay, and then we come to the 10th house. So 10th house is the house of completing work. It is not the house of profession, as most people would say. It is not the house of karma, as most people would say. It is it is the house which shows how you complete work. Okay, so you need fiery planets in the 10th house to be very, very disciplined. Okay, you need fiery planets in the 10th house to to complete work on time, to be a very good finisher, because most of the times you will see that someone may be a very good starter, but he or she may not be a very good finisher. Okay, so the 10th house represents that, right? Your ability to complete work. It also represents the source of livelihood, because you can obtain good livelihood only if only if you complete your work. Okay, it represents the governmental service. It represents the favors that you receive from the government. Okay, it represents political power as well. It represents fame. Okay, fame is a very important part of the 10th house. It represents whatever professional inclinations that you may have. It represents the teaching capability, that whether you are able to teach something to yourself or to others. Okay, it also represents self confidence. It represents the the your sacrificing nature, because if you look at if you look at completing work, you might have to sacrifice a few things. Okay, it also represents the wealth of the father, being the second from the ninth house. It also represents well-being of the father, again being the second from the ninth house. It also represents it also represents the financial status of the native. Okay, but for financial status, you don't really see the 10th house of the Rashi chart. You see the 10th house of the Navamsha. Okay, so if there are a lot of good planets, a lot of benefic planets in the 10th house of Navamsha, you'll gain a lot of money during your lifetime. You'll end up making a lot of money. Okay, so in medical astrology, it represents knee joint, it represents the kneecap. Okay, then comes the 11th house. So the 11th house is the house of fulfillment of desires, gains of all
Sir,
kinds.
one sec.
Yeah.
Sir, just I wanted to interrupt you. Can you tell me again about that fiery planets that you said about the 10?
Yeah, if you have fiery planets in the 10th house, you'll be very good at completing work. Okay, you'll be very
Okay.
disciplined. You'll be uh,
So fiery planets means say a Mars or
Surya,
a
Surya, Surya or Mangala.
okay. So Mars in the 10th is a good sign.
It's a good sign. It's a good sign.
Okay.
Although it will give you, of course, as I said, Mars is a malefic. So wherever it goes, it will create problems. Okay. So although it is good in the 10th house, it gets Digbala actually in the 10th house, but it also creates an attitude of my way or the highway. Okay. You don't want to be with a person that it is my way or the highway, right? So that's how it is. Then comes the 11th house, which represents gains and fulfillment of desires, income. Okay. And then it also represents the nature of earning. Nature of earning, by nature of earning, I mean that if you have, a malefics in the 11th house, your means of earning may be questionable. Okay. But if you have benefics, it's very, very good. Then it represents favors from the ruler. Okay. That means favors from the government. It represents the Guru Upadesha. Okay. It represents the Guru Upadesha because the Guru sits in the 9th house, and the words of the Guru, third from the 9th house, is the 11th house. So that is the house of Guru Upadesha. Okay. It also represents elder brother. Okay. It represents it represents, 11th is the sixth from the 6th house. So it is known as the Hara Bhava. I've explained in the previous classes. In one of the classes, I explained why it is known as Harasthana. It is known as the seat of Rudra. Okay. Rudra throws his Trishul from the 11th house and it strikes you in the 8th house. Okay. And in medical astrology, it represents legs, left ear, left upper limb, and then your ability to recover from disease. Okay. And then how to predict recovery from disease? If you're suffering from a very, very serious disease and you want to know whether you recover from it or not, okay, just see where your 6th lord is transiting. Okay. If your 6th lord is in the 11th house or in the 6th house, it represents that it will show that, that you will recover from disease. All right. Then comes the 12th house. It represents expenditure. It represents loss of wealth. It also represents, the house of spending. It represents bed pleasures. Okay. So you better have good planets in the 12th house, because if you have a malefic like Mars or Saturn in the 12th house, you will have a hard time on the bed. Okay. You will not find that sexual pleasure. All right. It represents bedroom. It represents, it also represents sleep and the loss of sleep. It also represents, poverty. It also represents the loss of authority. Okay. It represents your exit from the world. That means it is also very, very important to study the nature of death. Okay. It represents the arrival of the spouse as well. Okay. It represents renunciation. It represents foreign lands. Okay. It represents immigration. It represents your spiritual learnings. Okay. It represents your spiritual ashrams, the sampradayas that you are part of. Okay. So all these things are represented by the 12th house. All right. And in medical astrology, it represents the disorders of the sleep. So if you have, say, Mercury in the 12th house, it can lead to sleep disorders. Okay. If you have malefics in the 12th house, it can lead to sleep disorders. All right. Then mental imbalance. Of course, it represents hospitalization as well. It also represents, feet, the left eye, and finally, it also represents death. Okay. All right. So we'll come to the planets now. I'll just take a break for 5 minutes and then we'll come to the planets. Okay. Yeah, Udayji, you are most welcome to ask your question.
Okay, so I have two questions. The first one was, when you were going over the houses, I think you forgot to mention effort. So which house was for effort?
It is the third house. I think I said about the effort thing. It is the third house.
Okay, because I was using this online reference, and many of the things you said matched, but then in the 10th house, the karma and profession is there. So I think that's the one with the misconception. But then on the one I'm using as a reference, the 6th house is the one for effort on there. It goes with loans and debts.
Yeah, it is.
Is that a
It is the
mistake?
third house. It is the third house. It's the third house. Effort is
Okay.
always the third house. Okay. Sixth house, whichever reference you are using, that might have said it is the it is the 6th house, because it is the third from the third house, right? Oh, sorry, it is the fourth from the third house. I'm really sorry. So fourth house actually represents. It also represents. It also represents how you, let's say, I'm not finding that word. How can I say, the way you decorate things. Okay, fourth house represents your decoration stuff as well. Okay, So since the sixth is the fourth from the third house, so that is the reason it might have said that it represents efforts. But real effort, you have to see, you just look at the third house.
Okay. And then also, from one of the previous lectures, you fleetingly mentioned that having Ketu in the sixth house and Rahu in the 12th house is bad. I was wondering exactly in what sense.
No, it's not really bad actually. Okay, it's not really bad, but it will not, there is nothing like black and white in astrology. Okay,
Yeah.
that is something we need to be very clear about. By bad I mean in a materialistic sense. Okay, because sixth house is the house of work. Okay, it is also the house that helps you with money. Second, sixth, and 10th, these are the artha houses. Okay, these are the money houses. I'll come to that part as well. So what happens is that Ketu is about detachment. Okay, Ketu is about moksha, right? So when you have a planet that is giving you detachment, it also gives you, it also gives you a detachment from money. Okay, it also gives you a detachment from going out there and working, right?
Mm-hmm.
You encounter someone who is opposing whatever you are doing, and then you say that, okay, let him oppose, right? There is no desire, there is no sticking to the desire, and desire is very, very important, right? And Ketu is it represents it is very anti-desire. Okay, and if you have Ketu in the sixth house, what happens is Rahu will go to the 12th house. So what will happen is, you will 12th house is the house of freedom. It is the house of, it is the house where you live. Okay, it is the house where you are free from the rules and regulations of the society. Rahu in the 12th house would actually make you want freedom, but then your mind would be so twisted that you would actually you'll actually end up entangling yourself more in the search of freedom. So that is what I meant by it. Okay, so in search of freedom, you should not, you should be actually free, but then there is no freedom in the real world, isn't it? We always, freedom is a big word in the West, right? People are wanting to be free, but freedom from what? That is something that no one asks, isn't it? Freedom from what? From what do you want freedom? Right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the only freedom that you can have is death, isn't it?
Yeah.
Otherwise, from what do you want freedom? You want freedom from relationships, then don't have a relationship, right? You want freedom from money, then don't have money. You just go and live in an ashram.
In that sense, you always have freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
The
what
only real freedom you don't have is to not participate in on this because you're born without your choice.
yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is, and that is
And
what
that
real
was
freedom
based on
means.
Prarabdha. So
That
I
is
see
what real
what you
freedom
mean.
means, isn't it? Not to
Yeah.
take a part in the daily drama. Okay, but not many people can do that. Only say 0.1% of the population has that ability, and that is not something that people acquire from their birth. It is something that they have learned, that they have to learn under someone. Okay, so that's what it is.
But then I was thinking, like, what if like a benefic like Guru is coupled with Rahu in the 12th house? Because then I feel like it would undo the twisted nature because Guru
No.
represents.
It's again a misconception that Guru with Rahu is, Guru can control Rahu and Ketu. That is a myth that is being propagated. Okay, so you don't want a malefic and a benefic together. Of course, it has certain good things as well. For example, Guru and Rahu combination in a in Libra or in Taurus, it can give you a lot of money. Okay, it can give you a lot of money, but then Guru and Rahu will also will also make you have a lot of questions about about everything. Okay, it is known as Guru Chandala. Rahu and Guru together is known as Guru Chandala. Why? Because Rahu is the outcast, and Guru is someone who will always operate within boundaries. So the native is always confused as to when to accept boundaries and when to break them, and in that confusion, half of the life is spent. Okay, but then if it happens in some in some rajasic signs like Taurus, or in in Libra, it gives you a lot of money. Okay, because then you break boundaries to make money. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. If for the sixth house, what was you mentioned subordinates daily obstacles. And then what did you mention right before the physical astrology representation? There was one or two things I missed.
I said servants as well. I said maternal
Yeah.
uncles as well. So,
Maternal uncles.
yeah, I said servants as well. I said stepmother as well.
Oh, step. Okay, that is what I was missing. So when you're saying stepmother, you're not saying mother-in-law.
Oh no, 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 no.
Okay, gotcha.
Mother-in-law is a different thing.
Okay,
Mother-in-law is the 10th house. Okay, that is the 10th house.
okay, okay, gotcha. And then for the 8th house, you said it represents the marital status of a woman.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. What is, and then you said Mangalaya.
Mangalya. It is known as Mangalya Sthana. Okay, Mangalya.
Which is
Mangalya. Mangalya. Mangalya means the
And-
longevity of the spouse. Okay, Mangalya means the longevity of the spouse.
so it's the longevity of the native and the spouse.
No, it is the longevity of the husband particularly. Okay.
In particular, husband.
Yeah, in particular husband.
Okay. Thanks. And then you said it represents, okay, just disgrace, defeat, misery, death to father.
Sorry.
Can you?
Yeah,
Can you?
yeah. That's
Okay.
the father
Whole-
because it is the 12th
Rightful-
from the 9th house.
Okay. 12th from 9th. Frightful places. And then what else did you say?
I said crevices and holes and
What is
difficult
it?
fruits.
What's the word? I'm so sorry.
It's crevices, crevices, crevices.
Oh, crevices. Okay.
Yeah, we in India it is crevices. That's a pronunciation difference.
Okay. Hidden talents.
Yeah, hidden talents. Then you have unexpected gains. For example, gains from lottery. Okay.
Right.
Unexpected wealth. Okay. And then you also have your spiritual awakenings. Okay. Spiritual awakenings are also seen from the 8th house.
Mhm. Okay. And then you said for the 10th house that it's the wealth of the father and the well-being of the father, and you said because blank from 2nd house. I couldn't.
Yeah, I'm saying that and because it is the 2nd from the ninth house, so that is the
Oh.
reason it represents the wealth and the well-being of the father.
2nd from 9th house. Okay. And the 12th house, foreign lands, ashrams, immigration, your exit from the world. So you said arrival of spouse means.
Yeah, arrival of spouse means when Venus enters the 12th house. Okay, when Venus enters the 12th house by transit, that is a point where you will actually see a potential spouse landing up in your life. You may end you might not end with that end up with that person, but a potential candidate for your to be your spouse would certainly end up in your life.
Okay, gotcha. For man or woman.
For both.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I have a question. So when you said Venus transits through the 12th house, how do we calculate transits based on the charts?
Transits, for example, let's see the current transits. Just a minute. Suppose you have a Aries ascendant, right? So right now, if you have Aries ascendant, then the 12th house will be Pisces. So whenever Venus will be in Pisces, that means it is transiting your 12th house. Okay. For example, right now Venus is in the sign of Leo. So for all Virgo ascendants, Venus is transiting the 12th house. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Deepanshu Ji, I have a question about the 5th house also. So you talked about Purva Punya a lot for the 5th house,
Yeah.
which is accumulated karma of past life,
Yeah.
good or
Accumulated karma. Yeah. Good or bad.
so. Okay, is there a way to see? Um, so it's accumulated, but
Yeah.
how
Just a
would
minute. Just a minute. We are
how would
getting
you
power.
distinguish
Yeah,
good or
just a
bad?
minute. There is a power cut. Just hold on. Okay. Just. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me.
Yeah. So this I really appreciate you saying about Purva karma, and I
Yeah.
guess would it be a way to see whether it's, you know,
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can. You
good
can. You can.
karma
You
or
look at
negative?
the Ashtak Varga of the Ashtak Varga of the 5th house. Okay.
Mhm.
So if you have, if you have less points in the 5th house, then it means you have, your karmas have not been that good. Okay. And if you have more points in the 5th house, it's really, really good.
How do you look at the
Ashtak
Ashtavarga?
Varga, yeah, Ashtak Varga.
No, I'm asking, how do you look at that?
Ashtak Varga, if you have more than 26 points in the 5th house, it's you're good. Okay, but less than 26 points, it's not good.
So how do you calculate that? How's that calculated?
For the moment, you can just rely on the software. Okay. For the moment, you can rely on the software.
So
Otherwise,
that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I guess if I go to a website, is there
yeah,
some
you
like,
can use any app that'll calculate the
So-
Ashtak Varga for you.
so what is there like a button like it says Ashtavarga and you press it?
There is a button that'll say Ashtak Varga.
Okay, this is kind of a new concept. And then you said for pregnancy, it is 5th house, but you also look at the 9th house.
Right, 5th house is your, for the see, pregnancy happens because of the interaction of the male and the female, right? So for the ability of the male, you look at the 5th house, okay, and for the ability of the female to conceive, you look at the 9th house.
Oh, okay, you didn't say that. So it's the ability, the 5th house is for the male.
Right, right.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. And are these concepts that you're pulling from, where are they from? What?
No, they are
Oh.
they're in the BPHS. They are there in the BPHS.
All right.
It is in the chapter on bhavas. Okay, bhava swarupaya chapter. I've forgotten the chapter number, but it's there.
Thanks to Rashidji.
So just like the houses, the planets will also have their significations. Okay, so we'll go through, go through 3 planetary significations because I'm really running short on time. So the most important planet is the sun. Okay, a lot of things have been said by modern day astrologers that Saturn is the most important planet, Guru is the most important planet, but it is the sun. Okay, because that is the creator of life on Earth. All right. So we have to look at the sun to understand the planetary status or the signification. Okay. So what the sun does, it represents your physical strength. It represents dominance. It represents authority. It represents influence. It represents, it represents courage, valor. It represents enlightenment. Okay. It represents the soul. It represents the father. It represents the comforts of the father. It represents the government. It represents the favors from the government. Okay. It represents the kingly pursuits that you have. Okay. It represents, mental purity. Okay. It represents discipline. Okay. People have a misconception that Saturn represents discipline. No, it is the sun. Okay. And if you want to see how disciplined the sun is, there will only be the sun will rise till it, till it reaches the Uttarayana, the sunrise will always be ahead by 1 minute, and after it reaches the Dakshinayana, the sunrise will be again late by 1 minute. Okay, so that is the discipline of the sun. Okay, so it also represents your kingdom. Okay, it also represents your kingdom. It represents the summer season, which is known as Grishma. Okay, it represents heat, fire. It represents forests. Okay, it represents the eastern direction. It represents body. It represents face. It represents administration. It represents your leadership ability. It also represents doctors. Okay, people say all doctors come from the moon, but no, it is the sun, because the sun is the universal doctor. Okay, it represents copper. It represents ruby. Okay, it represents timber wood. It represents
What is that? Stimbaud?
timber. Yeah, timber. It represents timber. It represents Shiva as well. Okay. It represents Kshatriyas in the caste system, and by the caste system I don't mean the jati system that we have in India nowadays. It is the Varna system. Okay. Then it represents the the saffron color, the ochre color. Okay. It represents the flower of lotus. And in medical astrology, it will represent the soundness of health. It will represent, it will represent stomach. It will represent bile. It will represent heart, a right eye, bones, fever. It represents inflammation. Okay, inflammation. It represents diseases of the head. It represents headaches. It represents baldness. All right. So it represents biliary diseases. It represents injuries from falls. It represents, it represents diseases like epilepsy. Okay. So unfortunately, we have to stop here today because I'm short of time and there is a power cut. So I'm just running this on inverter. Okay. So, anyways, do you have any questions? We'll continue with the 9 planets in the later class. Okay, I don't think we have questions. Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. At the very start of the lesson, you said that the D3 divisional chart is microscopic view of the third house, and the house of the siblings. So please repeat the calculation, how to calculate.
Yeah. You want the calculation of D3, right?
Correct.
D3 has a way of calculation. I can just tell you the calculation of the 22nd Trikana. Okay, D3 you have to calculate the D3 on your own. Okay, and the 22nd Trikana is you have to place the degrees of the Lagna in the sign occupying the 8th house of the birth chart, and then determine the D3. Okay,
Devanshuji, when you say 22nd Trikona, what does that mean?
it just means, for your convenience, just assume that it is the 8th house of the D3 chart.
Okay, the 22nd Trikona is the 8th house of the D3 chart.
Right.
Okay, so how do we calculate that?
No, Trikana chart has that would be too larger for the scope of this course, because Trikana chart will be calculated by you can use the software for your convenience right now.
So then I didn't understand what you were saying about calculating.
I said that you can calculate it manually. Even after you calculate the Trikana chart, see, suppose the Trikana chart has been calculated, and then you find out the degrees of the Lagna, okay, in the D1 chart, and then place the degrees of the Lagna in the sign occupying the 8th house of the birth chart, and then calculate the Trikana. So it's a huge calculation.
I'm not I'm not following.
I'm saying that you just use for your convenience, just use the software to calculate the D3, and the 8th house of the D3 is the Trikana, is the 22nd Trikana.
But when you explained the calculation, what were you explaining?
I was saying that you calculate the degrees of the Lagna in the D1 chart. Okay. Then, find out the degree of the, place that degrees in the 8th house of the birth chart. Okay. And then determine the Trikana of that 8th house. Okay. So it's a manual calculation. Maybe one day when we do divisional charts, I can show you how to calculate it.
So if I understand what you're saying, you have the degree of the Lagna in D1. And then
but you have to calculate the Trikana as well. Okay, you have to calculate the Trikana as well. First, before finding out the degrees of the Lagna, you have to calculate the D3 chart.
So is the name for the D3 Trikana? That's the name? Is that the confusion?
Yeah,
now?
it is the name of the D3 Trikana.
Okay. So it's D3 or Trikana. That's the name.
Trikana, yeah.
It starts with D. It's Drakana,
Yeah.
Okay.
Trikana.
not Trikana.
Okay, thank you.
DRE
Okay,
double KNA.
okay, that was a confusion. So, excuse me. So you were saying, were you saying how to calculate the Trikana before?
No,
Is it-
I did not say that. I did not say that. I just said that, it's possible to calculate it manually, but maybe when we do, if we go for divisional charts later on, and that is a huge course because each chart means something. Okay. Just like D1 means something, the other charts will also mean a lot of things.
Right. So just to stay on point though, now that I understand the Drikana and the D3 are the same, that you have to calculate the D3 and then you place the degree of the Lagna in the 8th house, correct?
Right.
Okay, and what is that? And then what does that yield?
You don't have to you have to, then there is a calculation of superimposition where you are also calculating the lagna of the D3 and then superimposing with it. So it's, as I said, it's a huge calculation. You'll simply arrive at the 8th house of the Trikana. Okay, that is what it means.
No, don't shortcut it now that you've explained it. So you also know the Lagna of the D3.
Yeah,
Right.
you also have to calculate the lagna of the
Okay.
D3.
And then,
You superimpose it with the lagna of the D1 in the 8th house of the D1.
so what do you mean superimpose it? What do you mean?
Superimpose it, it means you just place one chart over the other. There is a procedure to do it. I did not want to go into it because I did not want to make it complicated.
Well, you did go into it and
Well, that's what I said. I just brought out the superimposition principle now that you asked. So I'm not going into it anymore.
so, right, I just want to understand. So you know the Lagna of the D3 and then you superimpose that over,
You superimpose the D3 over the D1.
D3 over D1. So you know the Lagna of the D3 and you know the Lagna of the D1. And then you're saying you place the Lagna of the D1 in the 8th house. Is that right?
Right. And then you have to calculate the D3 of the 8th house of the D1 chart. That is again another calculation. No?
Sorry, say that slowly. Then you have to calculate what?
Then you have to calculate the D3 considering the 8th house of the D1 as the lagna. So that is another
You
part
have to calculate the D3 what?
by considering the 8th house of the D1 as the lagna.
Considering, okay, the 8th house of the D1 as what?
As the lagna.
Of what?
Lagna of D1.
Okay. There's a lot of Lagnas and 8th houses in this equation. All right. So dare I? Okay. All right, I'll let it go for now. All right, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, then that's it in this class. And should you have any doubts or anything else, you're most welcome to ask it in the group. The recordings will be available either by tonight or by tomorrow morning.
I just had a quick question. When you're using the software to calculate Drakana, you want to use Sripati, right, for the power?
I did not get your question.
When you're using the software to calculate Drakana, you want to use Sripati for the bhava, right?
Yeah. Sripati.
What does that mean?
That is
What
an
is it?
option. That is an option.
What is Sripati?
Sripati was an astrologer who put out that option. So you use the Sripati calculation. Just like you have Ayanamsha, Lahiri Ayanamsha. So you have different types of Ayanamshas. You have an Ayanamsha by B.V. Raman as well.
Okay.
There was
Deepanshu, I don't normally use software. So what would you recommend some sites that I could go to?
Anyways, you have to use a software if you want an accurate calculation live, because if you look at it from a website, it is I don't know how accurate it is, but you can always download the Jagannath Hora from vedicastrology.org. Okay, Jyotish app is for mobiles. Okay, Jyotish app, people have been using it as far as I know. You can also use a software which is known as Divya Chakshu. Okay, I'll just type the name Divya Chakshu. Divya Chakshu. Yeah. So this is
Is
another
that
one.
for like PC?
No. For PC, you just download Jagannath Hora. PC, just download Jagannath Hora.
Is that VedicAstrologer.org?
Yeah, it's on VedicAstrology.org.
Okay, so that's a PC, and then the Divya Chakshu and the
It's-
Jyotish app are apps.
For mobiles.
Okay.
I would consider Cosmic Insights, but Cosmic Insights would actually, would actually ask you a lot of times for your paid version. So people get frustrated by it. Okay. Cosmic Insights is actually good. All right. But if you'll get good results only if you use the paid version. All right. So it's much better if you use the Jyotish app. It does not look that attractive, but it's good. But it has a lot of features. The Jyotish app.
Shannon, are you using the free version of Cosmic Insights?
I know, I'm using the paid one.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. All right. All right. Thanks to Varshiji so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you everyone for joining. I'll see you next week for another class. Okay, namaste. Om Gurave Namaha.